Nobody in that courtroom could have predicted what was about to happen. The cameras had come expecting a routine legal hearing, the kind Judge Judy had presided over 1,000 times before, quick, sharp, and decisive. But when Nancy Pelosi walked in, everything changed. She didn't walk in as a witness or even as an observer. She walked in like a storm wearing a designer suit, her chin high and her smirk sharper than glass. And in the middle of Judy's measured questioning, when the silence was still and the tension was just beginning to hum, Pelosi leaned forward, raised her hand slightly like she was silencing a child, and said it. The 7 words that would ignite a firestorm across the nation. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. You are uneducated, Judge, everyone knows it. The words sliced through the courtroom like shrapnel. For a second, even the clock seemed to stop ticking. The bailiff blinked. The audience gasped. And Judge Judy didn't move. Not a flinch. Not a breath. Just that famous icy stare. The one that has frozen attorneys, CEOs, and con artists in their tracks for decades. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was loaded. As if behind her eyes 100 pages of evidence were already stacking themselves into a weapon. Pelosi smirked again, confident she had won the room. She had no idea she had just pulled the pin on her own reputation, because what Pelosi didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that Judy had been waiting, not for this moment exactly, but for someone like Pelosi, someone arrogant enough to think Judy's decades on the bench meant nothing, someone bold enough to think Judy's calm meant weakness, someone foolish enough to think Judy wouldn't fight back. And what Judy was about to do in the next 47 seconds would become one of the most replayed courtroom moments in American history. But in that frozen silence, the audience saw something else, something they would talk about for years. They saw Judy smile, just barely, a faint knowing smile that said she wasn't hurt. She was amused. She wasn't offended. She was preparing. And as that smile flickered across her face, Pelosi's own expression faltered just for a split second. She didn't understand why the room suddenly felt colder, heavier, charged like the air before a lightning strike, but the viewers at home would later say they saw it too. The exact instant Nancy Pelosi realized she had made the most catastrophic mistake of her career, because Judge Judy wasn't about to defend herself. She was about to redefine herself and expose something Pelosi had spent years hiding from the public eye. And when that hidden truth came out, Pelosi would be left speechless. This was no longer just a legal hearing. This was about respect, reputation, and the silent power of a woman the world had underestimated for too long. If you believe respect must be earned and not demanded, comment "Respect Matters" below, and stand with Judge Judy as this unforgettable moment begins. The courtroom did not recover from those words. Not quickly. The air seemed heavier, like it had grown thicker, harder to breathe. Even the reporters who had come expecting an ordinary civil dispute found themselves leaning forward, their pens hovering, their eyes darting between the two women like spectators trapped inside a slow-moving collision. Nancy Pelosi sat back in her chair, her lips pressed into a satisfied line as though she had just finished carving her name into marble. Judge Judy hadn't moved an inch. Not her hands, not her eyes, not the corner of her mouth. But the stillness wasn't weakness. It was pressure. Silent, invisible, crushing pressure building under the surface like a fault line ready to split the earth open. Pelosi thought the silence was surrender. Everyone else felt it was the opposite. The bailiff swallowed hard. He'd worked beside Judge Judy for years, watched her dismantle arrogance in under a minute, and he could feel it. The shift. It was subtle, like the way wind shifts before a storm you can't see yet but you can feel in your bones. Judy slowly adjusted the papers in front of her, perfectly aligning their corners, her eyes still locked on Pelosi. That tiny gesture sent a ripple of unease through the room. It was the kind of composure that didn't come from calmness but from control. Pelosi broke the silence with a laugh that rang too loudly, too hollow. It cracked like glass in a cathedral. "What?" she said, her voice laced with mockery. "No witty comeback? No clever remark? I suppose education does have its limits." The audience stiffened. They knew that tone. They had seen Judy's courtroom transform from casual to catastrophic when someone used that tone. Still, Judy didn't speak. She just tilted her head slightly, studying Pelosi the way a hawk studies a mouse wandering too far from the grass. And then something happened that nobody saw coming. Judy leaned back. Just slightly. Just enough to suggest she wasn't cornered. She was patient. And as she leaned back, a quiet smile ghosted across her lips, so faint it could have been imagined. It wasn't the smile of someone hurt. It was the smile of someone sharpening a blade in their mind. Pelosi's smirk flickered, For the first time, something behind her eyes shifted. Just a flicker of uncertainty. Gone almost as soon as it appeared. But the damage was done. That flicker told the room everything. Nancy Pelosi had thrown her hardest punch and Judge Judy hadn't even blinked. The tension coiled tighter. The silence stopped being awkward and started becoming unbearable. Reporters scribbled furiously now, knowing they were witnessing history in slow motion. The bailiff straightened his posture as if preparing for impact. A woman in the second row clasped her hands together, whispering something that sounded suspiciously like a prayer. The narrative outside that courtroom had already begun. Phones buzzed quietly inside handbags. Tweets were flying out of the building. Clips of Pelosi's insult were already looping, online with captions like "Pelosi calls Judy uneducated," and the insult heard around the nation. People watching the live stream whispered to each other that Judy looked calm, but her calmness was terrifying, because everyone who had watched her for years knew what it meant. Judge Judy was loading her ammunition. Pelosi misread the silence as weakness again. "I suppose some of us," she said lightly, "rise through merit, and others simply rise through noise." Her tone was silk stretched over steel, but it trembled at the edges just enough that only the closest spectators noticed. Judy noticed. Judy's eyes narrowed a fraction, not in anger but in assessment, the way a chess master studies the board seconds before declaring checkmate. And in that microscopic movement, the energy in the room inverted. Pelosi had walked in towering above everyone. Now, somehow, she looked smaller. The audience began to shift their weight, leaning forward without meaning to, caught in Judy's gravitational pull. It wasn't what she said, it was what she hadn't said. The unsaid words hung in the air heavier than any verdict. "You think I'm uneducated. You have no idea what I know about you." That unspoken promise hung there like a sword suspended by a thread. And everyone knew, the moment Judy decided to let it drop, it would not just cut through Pelosi's insult, it would cut through her entire public image. But Judy didn't strike yet. She let the weight grow, the way a thunderhead lets the air tighten before it splits open with lightning. That was Judy's brilliance, and everyone knew it. She never fought from anger. She fought from patience, from precision, from the unshakable certainty that truth would win, and she would be its instrument. Pelosi crossed her legs, fidgeting with her pen now, trying to mask the movement as casual. It wasn't. The smirk that had once looked like triumph now looked like defense, like someone trying to hold together a crumbling mask. Judy finally lowered her eyes to the papers in front of her, scanning them with the slow deliberation of someone who already knew exactly what they contained. It wasn't about evidence, it was about timing, about building a silence so powerful it would make the coming words impossible to forget. No one in the room knew what Judy was about to say, but everyone knew it would be devastating. For a long moment, Judge Judy didn't lift her eyes from the papers. The scratching of pens had stopped. Even the air conditioning sounded too loud. It felt as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for her verdict on an insult rather than a case. Then, without warning, Judy placed her pen gently across the top page, folded her hands, and looked directly at Nancy Pelosi. The temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Her voice, when it finally broke the silence, was almost too calm. "Uneducated," she repeated softly, like she was tasting the word, weighing its worth. "That's an interesting accusation. Coming from you." The effect was immediate. A ripple of sound rose from the audience, the kind of collective gasp people can't stop even when they try. Pelosi blinked, her lips parting slightly as though she hadn't expected Judy to respond at all, at least not like this. But Judy didn't give her a chance to speak. Her tone sharpened by a single notch, enough to cut through the stillness like a scalpel. "You see, Congresswoman," Judy continued, "education isn't just a degree you hang on a wall or a title you repeat to yourself until you believe it. Education is the ability to tell truth from performance. It's knowing when power has blinded someone so completely, they can't tell the difference anymore." Pelosi's smirk returned for half a second like a reflex. It was brittle this time, strained at the corners. She crossed her arms, a gesture meant to look confident but landing like a shield. Judy saw it. Everyone saw it. "I've spent 55 years in the law," Judy said evenly. 27 of them behind this bench, hearing more lies, more arrogance, and more self-delusion than you could fit into every speech you've ever given. Her eyes didn't blink. Not once. "And I have never once mistaken arrogance for intellect. Until today." The words hit like a gavel slamming down. The audience flinched at the soundless blow. Pelosi opened her mouth to speak, but Judy's voice rose. Just slightly, just enough to slide over hers without effort. "Do you know what the difference is between being educated and merely powerful, Congresswoman?" Judy asked, leaning forward now. "Educated people use truth to build. The merely powerful use lies to protect themselves from it. You've built fortresses out of lies for decades. and you think they make you untouchable. But they don't. For the first time, Pelosi hesitated. It was barely there. A fractional pause before her lips moved, a flicker in her eyes, but the courtroom caught it. The cameras caught it, and Judy saw it like blood in the water. "I don't need to raise my voice," Judy said, almost whispering, "because truth does the shouting for me." The room went utterly silent again. It wasn't Judy's volume that stunned them. It was the precision, the clinical way she was peeling back Pelosi's armor one thin layer at a time. It was surgical, merciless. Pelosi tried to laugh. "Oh, please," she said, waving a hand, her tone dripping with condescension. "This is a courtroom, not a stage. Save the dramatics." But her voice cracked on the last word. Judy didn't blink. "No, Congresswoman," she said. "This isn't a stage. But you've treated your entire career like one, haven't you? Every scandal deflected with a smile. Every failure disguised as strategy. Every truth buried under applause." Pelosi's hand froze halfway through adjusting her jacket. She slowly lowered it, realizing too late that every attempt at composure now looked like fear. Judy let the silence stretch for one long, devastating beat. Then she leaned even closer, her voice dropping into something cold, something sharp. "You called me uneducated, but you know what terrifies you more than anything? I don't need to be part of your world to dismantle it. I don't need your approval, and I don't need your permission." The words slammed into the room like a wave. Reporters froze, fingers hovering above their keyboards. The audience didn't move. It was the tone. Quiet, measured, yet radiating the kind of power that doesn't ask to be recognized because it simply is. Pelosi's face had gone still. Not calm. Just still. The way prey goes still when it realizes the predator has stopped circling and started closing in. "You mistook silence for weakness," Judy said. "But silence is just the moment before truth decides to speak. And I promise you, Congresswoman," her eyes narrowed, glinting like steel in sunlight, "truth is about to speak." The room felt like it tilted. A current passed through it, the kind that makes every nerve stand at attention. Judy slowly straightened her back, reclaiming every inch of the bench as though she were rethroning herself, 1 inch at a time. Pelosi's fingers tightened around her pen, the only movement she seemed capable of. Judy didn't take her eyes off her. "You came in here thinking you could tarnish my name in front of this country," she said. "But the only thing that will leave this room tarnished is yours." And with that, Judy sat back in silence. The trap had been set. The audience didn't know it yet, but they had just watched the first crack form in Pelosi's armor. In 47 seconds, that armor would shatter. Judge Judy didn't give Pelosi a warning. She gave her a countdown, and only Judy knew it had already started. She leaned forward, her elbows resting lightly on the bench, and the room instinctively leaned with her. "You want to talk about education?" Judy said softly. "Then let's educate." Her voice sharpened like a blade sliding from its sheath. "In 1965, I graduated from American University. In 1967, I earned my law degree from New York Law School. I passed the bar on my first try. I've served as a family court judge in New York City, presided over more than 20,000 cases, and have been entrusted with the lives of children, the futures of families, and the enforcement of justice longer than you've been in Congress." The words were rapid now, measured, lethal. "And while you were busy giving speeches about values," Judy continued, "I was upholding them, in rooms where nobody clapped, where nobody cheered, and where the only thing louder than the crying children was the silence after the verdict. That's where education lives, Congresswoman. Not on stages, not in sound bites. In duty." Pelosi's smirk was gone. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes darted toward the audience as if searching for someone, anyone, still on her side. No one moved. Judy didn't blink. "And if you want to compare records," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow hit harder than a shout, "I've never had to beg for respect. I've simply earned it, while you've spent decades borrowing it from fear." A stunned hush swept through the courtroom. Pelosi opened her mouth, but nothing came out. And that was when Judy delivered the line that would echo across America. "Power might silence people, Congresswoman, but education teaches them how to speak again." The words detonated. For a full 5 seconds there was nothing. Not a cough, not a breath, not the scratch of a pen. Just silence, raw and absolute, broken only by the sound of Pelosi setting her pen down with trembling fingers. Judge Judy leaned back, reclaiming her throne with the calm of someone who knew she had just rewritten the moment into history. Pelosi stared straight ahead, her face drained of color, her lips pressed together in the thin line of someone who had just realized they would never win the room back. The 47 seconds were over, and Nancy Pelosi, America's seasoned speaker, could not speak. If Judy's words left you stunned too, smash the like button right now to honor this legendary clapback. The silence didn't break, it shattered. It cracked open like glass under pressure, and what spilled out wasn't sound, but disbelief. Reporters who had been scribbling nonstop now sat frozen, their pens motionless above blank lines, as if they were afraid to move too soon and miss the echo of what they'd just heard. The bailiff slowly lowered his gaze, almost in reverence. Even the courtroom cameras seemed to hesitate, their red lights steady but their operators wide-eyed as though they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. Nancy Pelosi sat perfectly still. Too still. Her posture said defiance, but her face betrayed the truth. That unmistakable glassy stare of someone trying desperately not to blink, not to break, not to crumble. She clutched the edge of the table like a woman who had just realized the ground beneath her wasn't solid anymore. And Judge Judy? She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply turned one page of her notes, slow and deliberate, as if Pelosi had been nothing more than a mild interruption in the flow of her day. That single gesture hit harder than any words could. The audience shifted back, whispers rippling like wind through dry grass. Someone exhaled sharply, as if they had been holding their breath since Judy's first sentence. Another mouthed the word wow without sound. The reporters finally moved again, not writing, just staring, knowing they hadn't just watched an argument. They had watched an erasure, and everyone knew it. The power in the room no longer belonged to Pelosi. It hadn't for a while. It belonged entirely to Judge Judy. Outside the courtroom, the world had already chosen its side. Within minutes, clips of Judy's words flooded every platform, stitched into highlight reels and replayed in stunned silence by anchors who rarely agreed on anything. Comment sections overflowed with a single sentence. She didn't just win. She reminded the world who she is. Even Judy's fiercest critics found themselves pausing mid-argument, forced to admit what Pelosi had just proven the hard way. That Judge Judy's power never came from theatrics or ratings or the stage. It came from something older, deeper, unshakable, a lifetime of refusing to bend to arrogance. Across social media, new hashtags rose like wildfire. Educated with grace and Judge Judy was ready. They weren't just celebrating her word, they were celebrating what she represented. For young law students, it became a rallying cry. For women who had spent years underestimated, it became a victory they felt in their bones. And for millions of viewers who had watched Judy for decades, this moment wasn't about law or politics anymore. It was about seeing the quiet, fierce force they'd always known her to be finally cut through the noise again, and win without ever raising her voice. Pelosi had tried to shrink Judy to an insult. Judy had answered by becoming larger than the insult itself, and that was the difference between power that demands respect and legacy that commands it. Judge Judy closed her folder as if she were sealing a vault. The echo of that soft thud rolled through the room like thunder muffled by velvet, and just like that it was over. No gavel slam, no raised voice, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet reclaiming of dignity from someone who had tried to steal it, and failed. Nancy Pelosi still hadn't moved. She sat staring forward, eyes glassy, as though her mind was trying to rewind what had just happened, searching for a point where she could undo it. There wasn't one. That was the thing about Judy. Once she spoke, the record was permanent. The audience stood slowly, like people rising at the end of a eulogy. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence was the applause, deep, reverent, undeniable. Even the reporters rose to their feet, not out of duty, but instinct, as though something ancient inside them recognized the gravity of what they had witnessed. And through it all, Judy remained still. Not triumphant, not proud, just steady, the same way she had been steady through 27 years of public firestorms, through courtroom storms that would have broken lesser figures. Because Judy's power was never about the performance, it was about the permanence. As she stood, the room parted like the Red Sea. Not from fear, but from respect. That rarest kind of respect, the kind that doesn't have to be demanded or explained. It just arrives silent and overwhelming like gravity. Pelosi lowered her gaze, the first movement she had made in minutes. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was everything. The speaker who had walked in like royalty was now leaving like a shadow, quiet and diminished, swallowed by the weight of her own silence. Judy didn't look at her as she passed. That was perhaps the final blow. The unspoken reminder that once Judy has decided you are no longer worth her attention, you no longer exist in her courtroom. And that was what made this moment echo so much louder than the insult that had started it. Pelosi had tried to reduce Judy with words. Judy had erased her with silence. Outside, the courthouse steps overflowed. A crowd had gathered during the hearing, pulled in by whispers that something historic was unfolding inside. Now they stood pressed against the barricades, craning their necks, holding up their phones, desperate to capture even a glimpse of the woman who had just reminded the nation what authority really looks like. The doors opened, and there she was, Judge Judy, small in stature, monumental in presence, walking down the steps without a glance to either side. The crowd didn't cheer. They hushed as if a gust of wind had passed over them, pulling every stray word out of their throats. The silence was louder than shouting, and then, softly at first it began, a single voice said, "Respect." Another joined, "Respect." Soon dozens were murmuring it, then hundreds, the sound swelling like a tide, rising behind her as she walked into the daylight. A low, steady chant carrying her name like an anthem. Respect, respect, respect. Judy didn't turn. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. She just kept walking. Head high, shoulders squared, as though she were carrying something far heavier than her briefcase. Something invisible yet unbreakable. Her legacy. Across the country, screens lit up with the footage. Cable news anchors replayed it on loop, their voices tinged with awe. Headlines blazed across every platform within the hour. Pelosi silenced. Judge Judy redefines power in 47 seconds. Clips went viral on every feed, captioned simply with 3 words: "She ended her." But the people who had followed Judy for decades saw something different. They saw not the destruction of Pelosi, but the restoration of Judy. They saw a woman who had been mocked, underestimated, and dismissed rise from her chair and remind the world that intellect doesn't shout and real strength doesn't flinch. For countless young women watching, it became more than entertainment. It became proof. Proof that you can be calm and still win, that you can be quiet and still shake the ground when you speak, that you don't need to roar to be heard, you just need to know the truth and carry it like fire. Pelosi's words would fade. Judy's moment would not. In law schools, professors began showing the clip in lectures about courtroom conduct. In corporate offices, women replayed it in break rooms, whispering, "That's how you do it." And in homes across America, daughters sat beside mothers watching it together, both silently absorbing what they saw, not just victory, but vindication. And somewhere in the quiet corner of her home, Judy likely sat down at her kitchen table, poured herself a cup of tea, and opened the newspaper like nothing remarkable had happened at all. Because to her, this wasn't victory. This was simply what happens when truth remembers its voice. Nancy Pelosi had tried to rewrite Judy's legacy with a single insult. Judy had responded with a single moment and written it in stone. That's why this won't just be remembered as a courtroom clash. It will be remembered as the day the world was reminded that some people don't need power to be powerful. They just need silence. And the right 47 seconds. If this moment reminded you why real respect still matters, subscribe now and comment "Power in Silence" to stand with Judge Judy and keep her legacy alive.